Hello, my name is Deshaun Lindor, and today I'll be talking about how Street Fighter and Tekken's art makes the characters stand out for the engagement of the player. Because both of them are games that I've played a lot, and I wanted to talk about them. And what it will be about precisely is just talking about the character designs for both games, and which games I'll be talking about specifically is Street Fighter 6 and Tekken 8. And why is it being compared? Well, I just wanted to talk about how the character designs appeal for player's choice. Say you go in the game for the first time and you're thinking, what character should I play? Well, this is going to go into what sort of decision makings you need to go to in order to get to that point. So, the method I've decided to use is textual analysis because I'll be talking about more of the characteristics, the player style, the way that the characters fight, dress, and even both how the game models look. I thought the methods used for textual analysis helps because it gives a more broader sense for all context be on text. Because simply put, it can talk about both the social, political, cultural, or artistic context for it. And I just thought that it'd be much more easier. But another example is Control, which Heli Saloma basically explained it best because in her presentation, she was more in the process of creating costumes for the characters in Control. I haven't played it, it's not my type of thing, but I can appreciate it because Jessie is much more casual in her dress attire in comparison to everyone else because whilst everyone is dressed in a more work-orientated government type look, I have essentially thought it would make sense to talk about Jessie due to how casual she looks as well, because she has jeans, she has more of a casual jacket, whilst everyone has the traditional suit and tie, quote from, the one hit song. But because she's more of the actual lead of this government, it makes her stand out in comparison to the other NPCs, which I thought to mention here. So, another example that I wanted to talk about was a book made by Jenny Harder that explains more about the creative design for games and animation for characters in general. But the main takeaway that I took from this book was that they make it very clear that you have to consider how the character is designed, both for placement and how the player sees them. From the silhouette to the way they move, how the camera is placed, and how easy it is to be able to pay attention to the details that stands out in comparison to others. Because that also leads into another part, which is just creative design by Brian Tillman. And that also fits hand in hand because these archetypes essentially make the character either into good or bad, which gives the silhouettes much more growth in order to show off who exactly they are. And later on I will be going on about it, but with the silhouettes and clear archetypes that gives the tropes, the traits, the personality, it makes it easier for the player to understand what exactly character they're actually getting. But because I wanted to contextualize both the games as well as the player experience, is that because they have so much history, so much culture behind them as well, I just wanted to essentially just highlight how someone would basically choose said character and why. But because both of the franchises have more passion and good communities behind them, which are old as hell, I just wanted to essentially highlight why they would want to engage with it. Because both games is much more different from one another. Both similar in terms of fighting games, but much more different than each other. Because while Street Fighter is a mental poke game that requires footsies and spacing, Tekken is much more complicated with its 3D plane, it's much more juggling, it's much more frames, and so because both of them are very old games, with Street Fighter 1 released in 1987, whilst Tekken was released in 1994, it just gave more standards for the fighting game genre, which implemented more and more stuff the newer it came. Because both of them have a surreal style, while still having much more brute origins to, the games that they came from. But it also entices players to choose set characters that either fit the style that they play, or they want to be the best with said character, or just learning how to be better with them, or just want to have fun, because you can have characters that have a lot of fun. For example, the games I'll be talking about specifically in terms of Street Fighter and Tekken is Street Fighter 6, that was released in 2nd of June 2023, which has all these characters that all play different and look different from each other. They all have much more exaggerated type looks, and all of them are very different in terms of physique. Meanwhile, with Tekken 8, everyone has much more wilder type looks, but they also have much more bigger in terms of numbers, in terms of the cast, and they're much more complicated. But I can't be talking about all of the characters from both games, or otherwise we'll be here forever. But I will be talking about 4, which I will be speaking about 2 right now, which is Hwoarang and Juri Han. And the only question you have is, who exactly are they? So, she debuted in Street Fighter 4 and is essentially the dark counterpart of Chun-Li. And what I mean by that is that she drew similar inspiration of the character Chun-Li, but in a much more different twist. So, with that said, Juri has the same type of origin as Chun-Li, where her family basically died to the same man that killed her father. However, unlike the heroic route, she went more of the dark and sadistic route, with her much more psychotic, crazy, and just wanting more revenge. And because she also had her left eye ripped out, she ended up replacing it with the Feng Shui engine. But because she is a Taekwondo fighter from Korea, she incorporates her love for spiders in said type of clothes style that she has. And with the fight style she has, she's very unpredictable, fidgety, she tends to mock and laugh at her opponents, and just highlights her unhealthy habits, such as continuously mocking or addicted to her phone, or just doing whatever, because in Street Fighter 6, Bison is dead. But she now is basically struggling with what she does with her life now that her goal is basically completed, which I think is much more interesting in comparison to how she was before, and just gives much more to explore, which gives the players sort of curiosity about her. That, or just because they think she's pretty or hot, people. But what does that say about Hwoarang? Now, Hwoarang is a Taekwondo fighter that is very arrogant. He's confident, he's oozing with smugness in that sense. But he's also the student of legacy character Bakudo-san in Tekken 2. And because of that, he tends to get scolded a lot. But the main focus I want to highlight is how, even though that he has a very thuggish and more arrogant personality, he still holds up his sort of traditional martial arts, even in his clothes style as well. And even his rivalry with Jin Kazama tends to stem from his competitiveness as well as his cockiness at the same time. Willing to improve in terms of a fighter, but also still learning to mature from it. And even adding his Blood Talon nickname into his said clothing as well. And even his ginger hair being dyed in comparison to his Korean heritage, just having usually black hair. So, now we're going to be basically talking about their complete design sheets, which highlights how both of them have essentially embraced the Taekwondo culture in their everyday clothes. However, both of them went about it in different ways. While Juri incorporated more of her personality and color scheme that she wanted, and even her affinity for spiders, that was explored about even in the story, Horang went about it in a different way. While still faithful, he still tries to get his more thuggish and rebellious sort of personality out there, even with his dyed hair and everything. Which, in comparison, goes back to my point about the other two book examples, that they had clear silhouettes, they show the move sets as clear as possible, and their personality is more on the forefront. You can tell what type of archetypes they are just by looking at them. Of the characters that the two of them are, is more in the forefront. Juri is much more psychotic and much more unpredictable, meanwhile Horang is the archetype of stubbornness. But even the head designer of Street Fighter 6, who was in charge in redesigning all of the Street Fighter 6 characters, even talked about what sort of personality Juri would have outside of just vengeance. That she's not really elegant, she's not sociable, she doesn't live the most healthy style. And even in all her previous concept art, it highlights the fact that this is a Juri outside of all the fighting and conflict, and just we want to essentially see what she's like outside of it all. Like, who is she outside of it? And he puts it best, basically just showing that because of the nihilism that's within her, she just hasn't grown as a person. She's even worse. Meanwhile, her older first concept art still had her more of a similar to Chun-Li. Meanwhile, Horang, he still had his more thuggish and bad boy attitude more in the forefront in comparison. Because while Juri still had much more concept, I feel like Tekken still just had more of a solid idea of what they wanted. Even with these similarities, both of them ended up having an affinity for bikes, which in turn ended both Street Fighter V and Tekken 7 having both of them lost their eye, and essentially having both the biker aesthetic and the eye patch over, and abandoning the whole Taekwondo aspect just to suit for the biker one. But now I'll be talking more of the protagonists for Street Fighter as well as Tekken. Well, Jin is the third protagonist of the Mishima family, because previously it was Heihachi and then Kazuya, but both essentially struggled with this whole conflict of the Mishima family, and Jin was just the latest that had to deal with said issue. Jin struggles with the power of the Devil Gene, which makes him a lost fighter that has shackles on him, and he wants to essentially be free of it. And because he is a character that is shaped by the rejection of who he is, and because his mixed martial arts style even inflicts that identity struggle, he sometimes is more stoic and reserved. But in comparison, Ryu feels weightless. He is a wanderer that has achieved his sort of enlightenment, because despite being the student of Goken and rival to Ken Masters, and struggling with the Sasui no Haido, he learns to overcome his darkness and is able to become a wandering fighter that reaches enlightenment but wants to journey even beyond that. And even in the concept, Jin struggled to figure out what sort of personality that they wanted, with Ryu still being older than Jin in terms of character creation. He had more of a solid idea, just showing more of his early beginnings in comparison. But the similarities that I wanted to highlight was how in Street Fighter V, he was still in the struggle and journey of enlightenment, still having the darkness that possessed him, but he needed to overcome it to defeat Bison, while Jin was more set on the back line, so that way when later on he can come up and then overcome his own darkness. But both of them are still on the same journey, it's just that Jin was still getting there while Ryu had achieved it. And even in their final looks, in terms of their complete sheets, Ryu is much more of a wanderer. He's much more wiser. He's shown his age as well as his experience through his looks and body. Meanwhile, with Jin, he's slowly accepting himself and even accepting who he is in part of the Devil Gene as well. and abandoning more of his solid red with a more red, gray, white, and black. But the conclusion is both the character designs and tend to fall into all types of archetypes, and companies tend to bounce ideas off each other if they end up basically either suiting the player base and what they want, as well as just making sure to mix cultures, character histories, and personality to stand out, and just making sure that the themes and silhouettes give the players more choice. But overall, whenever they design these characters, they keep the players in mind and make it so would they want to pick up this character and learn them if they essentially saw them at face value and how they play or act or their characteristics and go, hey, I wouldn't mind giving that character a go, because it gives an enriching experience both to new and old players. But other than that, I hope you've enjoyed what I've said, and I'll be signing off.